Hey everyone, I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold here at the Chess Club and Scholastic Center of Atlanta with another sponsored lecture. Unlike our previous lectures, we have a new sponsor who sponsored before, but his name's not anonymous. His name is Charles Marshall. Yay! Speech. And he's actually watching the lecture now. And if you want to sponsor a lecture, then you have to contact Karen. And then I'll be, taking a nap, but you can talk to Karen about it. So today's sponsored lecture is regarding the 1927 World Championship chess match between Capablanca and Alekhine. And I'll spend a few minutes talking about the goings-on of the match and how the match existed and so forth and so on. And then we'll look at some of the games. Now, they played a lot of games, so we can't look at all of the games because that would be a 12-hour lecture. As you all know, Alekhine won the match 6-3 with an incredible amount of draws, especially for that time. I guess if it was a Karpov-Kasparov match, it wouldn't be considered a lot of draws, but back in 1927, the players didn't draw every game, so that was, yeah. So the match actually took 2 months. It was from September to November of 1927. They played in Buenos Aires in South America. And at that time, since Steinitz became the first officially recognized world champion, world championship matches weren't organized the way they're organized now. There's not like a system of tournaments and matches and some world organization decides who plays the world champion, which is what happens now. Back then, the world champion would play whomever could raise the money if they felt like playing them. So in general, the world champion, whoever that was at the time, would prefer to play somebody they were probably going to beat, and also somebody who could raise the money, because you got to get some money going. And it was usually, if not always, up to the challenger to raise the money. So as a consequence, the person who was most suited to play for the world championship against the reigning world champion, that wasn't always the person. And second of all, they didn't have as many world championship matches because most people couldn't raise the money or didn't want to. So, that's actually one of the reasons Steinitz and Lasker were world champions for so long, is they didn't necessarily play the best opponents when they played for the world championship, and they didn't play that often like they do now. So Capablanca became the world champion in 1921 by beating Lasker. Lasker was pretty old at the time. He'd been world champion for, I think, 27, 28 years. So he was already in his 50s. And between 1921 and 1927, when this match took place, there were a lot of negotiations and discussions about somebody playing Capablanca for the world championship. Other people whose names were under consideration were Rubinstein and Nimzowitsch. And Rubinstein, I think occasionally was, in an asylum or couldn't raise the money. Nimzowitsch couldn't raise the money. And Alekhine had a lot of trouble raising the money. So I think Capablanca wanted $10,000. And what ended up happening was he got a $2,000 fee to play the match. And then I think it was $4,200 for the winner and $3,800 for the loser. Although I might have made that up, but something like that. And eventually the money was raised. And, now I'm a bit biased, and I know I'm biased because I grew up in a household where my dad was the head of the household chess-wise. My dad was a chess master, as most of you know. And my dad's favorite player ever was Capablanca. And as a consequence, my dad was not an Alekhine fan. So my whole childhood, I would hear how great Capablanca was and that, the only reason he lost this match is he didn't take it seriously because he thought he would win easily, and that the rest of his life, Alekhine was ducking Capablanca and not giving him a rematch. Are either of those things true? They're a little true. It depends on who you believe. Some people believe Alekhine was ducking Capablanca, and some people think he wasn't. They just couldn't raise the money. Most people believe, even today, that Capablanca was the superior player when they played, but Alekhine had better preparation, he had a better attitude towards the match, and Capablanca didn't play to his full strength. I mean, they played over 30 games, and Alekhine won 6-3, so I'm not sure how much of that I believe. There's a famous quote from Botvinnik where, when he was preparing for his world championship matches, he said, "It's very important to prepare well because, as was shown in the Capablanca-Alekhine match, the better player can lose the match. So whoever prepares better can overcome the fact that they're not as good a player." Paraphrasing, of course. What's funny about that is, as world champion, Botvinnik never won a match. And when he lost the match and had the rematch, then he would win when his opponent was the world champion. So in the times when FIDE existed and they were deciding through matches or tournaments or otherwise who was going to play the reigning world champion never won a match. So they must have picked some good opponents. And the first time the reigning world champion did win a match, I think, was Petrosian. But between 1948 and like 1963, world champions were really playing the right player. And obviously in this instance, as we know now, these were the two best players in the world, although some people before the match may not have thought that Alekhine was a match for Capablanca. One reason was Alekhine had never beaten Capablanca before. So, of course, this also happened in the Fischer-Spassky match. Fischer had never beaten Spassky before and started down 2-0. So that doesn't necessarily mean they can't win. Well, there's 9 decisive games in the match. Kasparov did a lot of analysis on this match, and reading between the lines, it seems to me Kasparov believes Capablanca lost the match because when he had big advantages or winning advantages, there were 2 or 3 occasions where he did not win and he drew. And because of that, I mean, he didn't win very many games. He won 3 games, he won less than 10% of the games. Now, Alekhine, on the other hand, was very good at winning when he was winning. Obviously, that's very important. Now, there's a rumor that's never been verified, and I don't know if anybody knows. You guys can look up on the internet and do research on your own. There's a rumor that if the match was 5-5, which it wasn't, but if it was, that they would stop the match and they would play another match, which makes no sense to me, but all right. The rules for World Championship matches are always under dispute when they're pretty old. So we're going to look at 3 games from the match. And again, it was played in South America, in Buenos Aires in 1927. The first game, Capablanca was white against Alekhine. This is game number 1. Now, one of the good things about a lot of World Championship matches is we have a clash of styles. So in this match, you would expect Capablanca to grind out positional and endgame wins, and Alekhine to win really exciting attacking games, sort of like what you would expect in Kasparov-Kramnik, Kasparov-Karpov, Tal-Botvinnik, etc., where the players have different styles, and that makes it more exciting. And in an unusual happenstance, many of the games Alekhine won, he just outplayed Capablanca, and Capablanca didn't seem very sharp. Now, luckily, when he was outplaying Capablanca strategically, which doesn't make a lot of sense based on previous games they had played, often he would end the game with a tactic that probably Capablanca missed. So this is game 1, and According to what I read, although I didn't look at every single game with a fine-tooth comb, this was the only E4 game. Every other game was D4, irrespective of what color the players were. So that's strange. And it was a French defense, and which we don't see a lot of in a world championship match, that's for sure. And after knight c3, bishop b4, which is the Winnower variation, Capablanca played a line which had a good reputation until this game. Obviously, the most common move nowadays is for white to play e5. And if you know my dad's game with Bobby Fischer, Fischer played a3, which is a move that he played in the 60s, which does not have a good reputation now. Okay, but Capablanca just traded on d5, so we have sort of an exchange French from a Winnower with the moves knight c3 and bishop b4. I mean, it shouldn't really give white any advantage. So now, sometimes if you have special preparation in these so-called boring lines, you can get a position you know that your opponent doesn't, and you can get an advantage because you know some of the ins and outs. But that's not what happened this game. I think Capablanca just tried to make the game boring and figured he would beat Alekhine because Capablanca would be better at that style of play. So they didn't really do anything of note. They just developed their pieces in a boring way. And Alekhine played what a lot of players do today, bishop f5, because they want to trade the white squared bishops. Obviously, the bishop on d3 for white is very good. And with the pawns in the center, white having a pawn on the dark square, and black having a pawn on the white square, those are the bishops that black wants to trade. And that's the reason we would play the move knight to e7. Now, it's very unusual, in my opinion, in the exchange French kind of position for both players to not put their knights on f3 and f6, to both put it on e2 and e7. Since black bishop isn't on d6, white can't trade the bishops with bishop f4. So white's remaining bishop isn't going to be as good. So bishop g4, I think a bishop's f5 is a very good move. Conversely, if earlier in the game, white had decided to put the knight on f3, then black would play bishop g4, pinning the knight, putting pressure on the d4 pawn. That's one of the reasons you play knight e2. If the bishop goes here, we can play f3 or h3, and we're not so concerned with the pin. But bishop f5, of course, to trade the white squared bishops. Okay, and they were traded. Queen d3 attacks the knight. Queen d7 defends the knight. It's not clear which way Alekhine's going to castle. And Capablanca played knight d1, which, according to most commentators, is his first mistake. I mean, these positions are usually not very exciting and lead to draws. And we don't see a lot of exchange Frenches at the top level, even if it starts as a Winnower. And Capablanca's playing very slowly to basically just trade knights. He played knight d1, so he could play knight e3 and trade knights, which isn't super exciting plan. And Alekhine, realizing the knights would be traded after knight e3, castled kingside. Castling queenside and playing for a mating attack doesn't make a lot of sense when you're trading all the pieces. Okay, and they traded. So again, it looks really boring. It looks really equal. It looks really drawish. But maybe black has a slight advantage because white's bishop is, blocked by his pawns. So I would argue that black's bishop is better than white's bishop, but it's such a small advantage that, it should just be an equal position. Okay, rook e8, knight f4, bishop to d6. So the bishop on b4 obviously isn't doing anything, and Alekhine is putting pressure on all of Capablanca's developed pieces, and also can play knight b4, which he does later, and it's not easy for white to attack anything. Now here, Capablanca could have played knight takes d5, and I assume after bishop takes h2 and queen d5, he just didn't like that because his bishop looks sort of silly on e3. It's blocked by all the pawns, and black's knight looks pretty good. I'm not saying I wouldn't have done that, but okay. So he played rook e1, knight b4, and even though this is sort of a boring position, it gets tactical very quickly, and the game gets very exciting because Capablanca plays it accurately, and it could be he just wasn't playing well this game, or it could be he thought this is a really boring position, it's going to be drawn soon, so, you know, every move is okay. Not sure. He played queen b3. Queen d2 is a lot safer, keeping everything defended. Queen f5, and now we have pressure here, and we have pressure on f4. Obviously, if white's queen was on d2, he would be defending his knight sufficiently, unlike now. Okay, rook c1, and Capablanca had two ideas. You'll see the one in the game, and then you'll see one I'm going to show you. If bishop takes the knight, then this knight on b4 is not defended anymore. That was his first idea. His second idea was he saw Alekhine's tactic, but he miscalculated the continuation. Do you guys see a tactic here that's a capture, that's not bishop takes knight? Alekhine played a more interesting tactic than that. If you want a suggestion, make sure you unmute yourself first so I can hear you. Come on, you guys are as good as Alekhine. You can do it. The people on YouTube who are watching are like, ooh, me. But you guys are in the future, so I am sorry. So there's several things going on here. This is attacked, and this is semi-pinned. It's a semi-pin because this rook is defending the rook, but on the other hand, the rook is defending the c-pawn. So we have an overworked tactic here, knight takes c2. Now, you could argue Capablanca didn't see that, but Capablanca says he did see it. He says he didn't see the move later. So the idea is if you take with the queen and we trade queens, your rook on e1 isn't protected. So you can't play, so black is just up a pawn here for nothing. And the other idea, which is what happened, is if rook takes, Capablanca thought the game would continue, bishop takes f4, rook c5. And this pawn's attacked, this pawn's attacked. If you play c6 to defend the d pawn, and I take on b7, you can't defend your c6 pawn. So Capablanca thought this was fine. And if you trade bishops, now all three of these pawns are attacked. So Capablanca's like, this is fine. Like he took the pawn on c2, but he activated my rook. And he actually missed something. Alekhine didn't play bishop takes f4, play queen takes f4. In my opinion, queen takes f4 is easier to see than knight takes c2, but that's my opinion. And obviously you can't take the queen because of back rank mate. So he stopped queen h2 check. And in this position, we can't play queen takes b7 getting our pawn back because the rook is attacked. Now, I would think, and I guess I'm wrong, maybe I'm not wrong, that black is a pawn up for nothing and he should just win easily. Well, he just took a pawn. And this is a world championship match. And I think black's bishop is better than white's bishop. And I think white's king is not safe at all because of all the holes around his king. So this looks like an easy win to me for black, but Capablanca was tough and the game got very interesting. So he doubled rooks. Now he could play queen takes b7 because his rook's not hanging, so b6. Queen b5, put it in h5 is a good move, h4. And rook e4 may be the cause of making the game interesting because Capablanca played a really nice move here, which is hard to meet. he played bishop to d2, which sacrifices his d4 pawn. I mean, black doesn't want to give up the e-file, so black has a decision to make. I would have done the same thing as Alekhine, because the line that Alekhine says is better, which is to double rooks on the e-file, allows queen takes rook check and rook takes rook. And I wouldn't do this if I was black, because black was just a pawn up for nothing. So now it's 2 rooks for a queen and a pawn. I don't know, I just wouldn't do that. But he claims that black is better here. I agree, because this bishop just isn't very good. And the rooks can't really get super active because the black bishop is controlling, a lot of the important squares where the rooks would get active. Okay, but Alekhine took the pawn, which is what I would have done. Okay, and white gets a lot of counterplay now because his bishop is good, his rooks, everything's good now. He's just down 2 pawns. But his pieces are good. Rook d3, and he plays bishop e5. He's trying to confuse black. Rook e5, and he gets one of his pawns back with rook takes h5. Now we're threatening queen e8 checkmate, rook e8 checkmate, and if you take the rook, I take the rook on d3, which is what happened. A very interesting variation points it out. I'm not sure if Alekhine pointed it out or the commentator. Is the move rook e6. This is a very funny move because if you take the rook, black doesn't recapture. Black plays rook d1 check, and white's in a lot of trouble. Can anybody unmute themselves and tell me what white should do instead of rook takes e6? Anyone?
Queen e8.
That is correct. Probably from Scott, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Queen e8 check. An X-ray checkmate. And somehow in world championship matches, we rarely see people hanging checkmates. It happens, but it's pretty rare. Okay, so he did play queen takes h5, rook e8 check, queen takes check, queen g6. White's down a pawn, but good drawing chances, I think. Okay, and in this position, black gave a pawn back, so you get to pass d pawn and attack white's king. In this position, Capablanca played rook d7, and he said in his annotations, that's the losing move, and he claimed king g2 was equal. I mean, obviously, black has a huge advantage with his passed d pawn, and white's king is not safe. I got queen e6, and so nobody agrees with Capablanca that that's equal. But rook d7 is a very bad move. Queen e6, threatening the rook on d7 and threatening rook e1 check. So rook d7 doesn't make any sense. Very bad move for Capablanca. So he has to check. He can't allow rook e1 check. He can't allow queen takes rook. Then he saves his rook. d4. And white's position is just very bad. The a pawn is attacked. The king is exposed. I have a passed d pawn. Very bad position. He saved his a pawn and played very nice queen c6 check. And in this position, Capablanca was forced to break my rule, so obviously he lost the game. If you have to break my rule, then you're in trouble. Now, a simple tactic, maybe not simple for everybody, but for world champions, is why queen f3 loses. Hopefully you all know why queen f3 loses. Somebody knows. Anybody?
Rook g1.
Yeah, rook g1, a typical removing the defender tactic. Winning the queen on f3. Well, if you move your king to the h file, rook h1 is going to be mate, or it'll be mate soon. White's king is walking up the board. That's not good. So he had to play f3. So now you know who won the game. Rook e3, threatening the queen and the f pawn. Queen e6 with the idea of rook e2 check, and white's king is just way too exposed. Tries to give his king some air, threatening queen takes, f3, checkmate. Queen f4, white's king is totally trapped. And actually in this position, the game was adjourned. The time control, which is very unusual, it was called the Karen time control, even in 1927, was 40 moves in 2.5 hours. Then at move 40, you get more time, and the game is adjourned after 5 hours. So I think that's Karen approved. Okay, these games could go hours and hours and hours. They would be adjourned if they were going too long. The game was adjourned, and they didn't make very many moves. h5, rook f2 resigns, because there's no defense to rook takes f3 check. And then, white's king isn't doing so well. So that game, Capablanca was strategically outplayed, and he was also tactically outplayed. He missed, the queen takes f4 move, and rook d7 was a tactical mistake also, and then he just got completely outplayed in what's considered a boring opening. And I think when the match started, Capablanca probably thought, if it's a boring endgame or a boring opening, and it's a strategical game, I'll win. If it's 100% tactics, then maybe Alekhine will do okay. So he tried to make a really boring position, but that didn't work. Okay, and the next game I want to look at is game 7. Okay, Capablanca gets to win too sometimes. He's allowed to win, not too often. And this was at Cambridge Springs. The main reason I chose this game, I wanted to show a game Capablanca won. And this is a line that I play for white. So I actually know this line. And the Cambridge Springs is when black plays knight b d7 in the queen's gambit, and then puts his queen on a5 very early. And there was a tournament in Cambridge Springs, Pennsylvania, I think 1904, and this was played all the time. And the idea is we're unpinning our knight, and we're pinning your knight. So that makes a lot of sense. In this position today, grandmasters usually play c takes d5, but I always play knight to d2. And that's what Capablanca played. That breaks the pin, and it controls the e4 square where the knight often goes. And occasionally, if black takes on c4, we can take with the knight instead of the bishop. So the knight on d2 does a lot of stuff. Now the problem with knight d2 is the bishop is no longer defended. It was defended when the knight was on f3, so you got to watch it. And often, when I have white in this position, my opponents take on c4, and before I take back, I have to take on f6, and then take with the knight. And I've had this position many times. Okay, and Alekhine played bishop b4, which is more aggressive. Queen c2, defending the knight. Castles. And this position, maybe I've had once, maybe. I think I've had it once. And I did not play bishop h4, but I understand bishop h4. He's, getting off of this rank, so the bishop won't get attacked. I think I've played bishop e2 here, but all right, so bishop h4, and black plays c5 because white lost the tempo with bishop h4. Black figures he has time to bust open the center since white's king is in the center, and that's more of an Alekhine kind of style. Let's make the game really complicated and interesting. Makes sense? Knight b3 attacking the queen. The queen goes to a4 because the knight is pinned. So this knight's pinned, and the queen is lined up against all of white's stuff here. So queen a4 is a pretty interesting move. Bishop takes f6. He got tired, I guess, of his bishop, kept getting harassed. Took on c5. Notice the knight is defending the pawn, but not really, because this is pinned, but really, because if the bishop takes the knight, then the knight takes the queen. So everything's pinning everything. So it's too complicated, so Alekhine is happy. He likes complications. Knight e4, making the game more complicated. Takes on d5. bishop c3 check, and knight c5, taking advantage of the pin of the knight on b3. And Capablanca played rook d1, and if you're going to lose a game of chess, then you probably made a mistake. And this is the position where Alekhine did something very anti-positional. He did it for tactical reasons. Okay, after trading on d5, he took on b3. This is a very bad move. He should just play b6, defending his knight, and then his bishop can harass the white rook. And you can see that white's pawns are isolated on the queen side. White's king is still in the center. White's bishop hasn't moved yet. White's knight is pinned. And for all of that stuff I just said, white's up a pawn. But he fixed Capablanca's pawn structure so that he would stop white from castling. He's going to attack the rook. If the rook is defended, he can attack it again. The queen's going to be on g2. If you move your bishop, queen takes g2 happens. If you don't move your bishop, then your pieces are going to be here the rest of the game. So Alekhine gave up on the queen side and decided to put pressure on white's king. And he said, well, white can't get developed, so this is great. But Capablanca saw further. He played bishop d3, giving up the g2 pawn, which Alekhine must capture. If you don't capture on g2, white just castles and white's up a pawn for nothing. Capablanca got his pawn back and then played bishop e4, defending his rook. The queen has to move. White's up a pawn. You could argue this is an isolated pawn. The king is no good. So black still has compensation. Queen d2, making a battery with the queen and the rook. c4, stopping bishop takes b3. And rook g1. Rook g1 is an excellent move from Capablanca. And this match shows something that I actually wanted to talk about this lecture. A lot of people believe that when some grandmaster has a style, like you might think Karpov is a great positional player and a great endgame player, and you might believe Tal is a great attacking player, and he's good at sacrificing and mating the king. And you could basically give this kind of description to any super grandmaster and tell me what kind of style they have. However, just because they have that style, it doesn't mean they can't do other things well. And that's a mistake a lot of people make, is sometimes those players that have those reputations, they can win other kinds of games. For example, a lot of you know the game from 1973 or 4. Now I'm getting confused. It's either 1973 or 4, between Karpov and Korchnoi in the Dragon Sicilian, where Karpov is out calculating Korchnoi and sacrificing and winning brilliantly, because he can do that too. Just doesn't do it very often. So Capablanca is playing a very complicated position with his king staying in the center. He sacrificed his g-pawn, he'll give away his h-pawn, and he's going to attack Alekhine's king. Alekhine's like, great, I got my pawn back. And now he plays rook h1, getting the open h-file. I think this is a lot of, this kind of play is very difficult for players who aren't super grandmasters. That to have an idea of giving away your h-pawn, then when the guy takes it, go back to h1, and now your rook has the h-file. That just seems like a very unusual concept. So material's equal, and I guess Capablanca's argument is black's king is actually worse than white's. White's king is very safe in the center because everything is near it. Black's king is not safe because of the open h-file. And white has the open d-file also. White's bishop seems pretty nice too. Okay, queen b2. He's on this diagonal, and I think he wants to go to this diagonal also, so he can play for some kind of checkmate. The king is going to get sort of trapped there. Queen c5, stopping queen a3. Bishop d5 has two purposes. One is to get the bishop attacking here, but we want to get the rook over here and put more pressure on the king. So the rook's going to slide over, and there's going to be a lot of attacking force against black's king. White's king is actually safe. Rook a6, defending the bishop again. rook e4. You can't move the bishop because of rook h8 check, and the rook is attacked twice. Rook e4 is a direct assault against the move rook a6. The rook on a8 was defending the rook on e8, and now it's not. So the bishop is now pinned because of rook h8 check. Rook d6, rook h7, threatening queen takes g7 check. And unfortunately, there's not a good, there's nothing you can do. If you play f6, breaking a very important rule about never playing f6, you just lose material. Rook h8 check. Your rook's defending your bishop, but I'm going to take your rook. So white's just winning everything here. So if you can't play f6, queen g7 is very hard to stop. So he just ran his king out. Now white's threatening queen takes f7 check because the bishop is pinned. And this looks like, just like the first game, this looks like Alekhine should be white. He's attacking. He's sacrificing. He's playing with great force. And in the other game, where white was positionally and strategically outplayed and lost the queen and rook ending, that looked like Capablanca was the one. So these guys are so good, they can play any style. And Capablanca wrapped it up. Obviously, black wants to trade queens because he's getting mated. So check, he trades queens. c5. And this is a very nice final move. I mean, every move wins. White's up 2 pawns. And probably if I was white, I would play rook b8 check. And then rook c8. But what Capablanca did was better. He played rook a7. This is really annoying. And the reason is, I'm threatening rook b8 check, and if you play rook c8, I trade, and then I check and trade the other rooks. If you play rook c8 to stop that, rook d4 is mate. I can't really suggest a move here. I don't know what black should do here. You can't trade all the rooks off, because then white's 3 pawns to 1 and a king and pawn ending. He can't get mated, so Alekhine resigned. That seemed like a better choice. So white's king didn't move that game, and even though black castled, black's king moved a lot and went back to d8. And in my opinion, Alekhine's main mistake was just taking on b3, fixing white's pawn structure, and he didn't have enough compensation for a pawn at that point. He thought white's king would be exposed, and he couldn't develop his pieces, but Capablanca just gave his pawns away, and Alekhine's king was exposed. So now, after Capablanca lost the first game, later in the match, this game and another game, he won 2 in a row. He was ahead 2-1. Draws didn't count. It was the first to win 6 games, with draws now counting. And after Capablanca was up 2-1, they played like 25 more games, and Capablanca only won 1 of them. So the last month of the match wasn't good for Capablanca. Now, the last game I want to show you is game 21. So it's getting late in the match when Alekhine is doing better. And Alekhine is black. I always have to flip the board for some reason. Okay. Man, it says Capablanca, Alekhine, Alekhine, Capablanca. Must be a great game. Okay. And we have another Cambridge Springs-esque kind of game. Different move order. Capablanca played knight f3 in the other game, and then played bishop g5. Now this is a well-known trap. Capablanca played e3. After takes, some of you might see the knight is pinned, so you can play knight takes d5. This is a well-known trap that's in a lot of books. Knight takes d5 actually loses because we sacrifice our queen, and then bishop b4 wins the queen back, and black ends up a piece. Queen d2 is the only legal move, and black has an extra piece. That's a well-known trap. Even in 1927, it was well-known. So Capablanca played e3, and there's a chess center in Charlotte, the Charlotte Chess Center, aptly named, and the owner and founder of the chess center is Peter Giannatos. This game reminds me of what would happen if I played a match with Peter. Peter's a FIDE master. He's about 2350 USCF. And he always plays black in these kinds of Queen's Gambit declines, and I always play white. When we play blitz chess, we always get this really boring position that they got, and usually he outplays me, he gets a good game, and then he loses on time. But I've seen these kind of positions all the time, but usually I'm white. This is the orthodox kind of Queen's Gambit for black. And what black wants to do is he's waiting for this bishop to move so he can take this pawn. He wants to fianchetto this bishop, if possible, because the bishop is blocked on this diagonal. So he wants to play either b6 or b5 and get the bishop to this open diagonal. And in this particular game, Alekhine achieved everything he wanted to, so he equalized the game very easily, which is exactly what happens when I play Peter. So I have to learn some theory that's not from 1927, I guess. So rook c1, Capablanca doesn't want to move his bishop. He's waiting for d takes c4, so he can just take in one move. And Alekhine plays a6. The reason is, after we take on c4, bishop c4, we're going to play b5 attacking the bishop, and then bishop b7, fianchettoing our bishop. Now some people here would take on d5, c takes d5, so that black can't do that plan. Probably that's what you should do. But he played a3, again waiting for d takes c4, h6, bishop retreats, and finally Alekhine plays d takes c4, and b5. Now, if I played a3, which I have in similar positions, I would play bishop to a2 because I like my bishop on this diagonal. And Capablanca played bishop e2, which I find very passive considering he played a3 and his bishop can stay on this nice diagonal. The bishop on e2 just seems passive to me. Bishop to b7. Alekhine got everything he wanted except c5. Once he plays c5, perfectly equal. And to be frank, I don't see much white can do about it. b4 looks really weakening. Then black could play a5 and totally destroy this pawn structure. So he just allowed c5, and I think the opening battle was won by Alekhine. I think he's completely equalized. White has no advantage. Back to the drawing board. Again, very similar to my games with Peter. I'm white, and it seems like he knows the positions better than I do, and he always equalizes too. Okay, and they made it more equal by trading. Knight d4. And in this position, it's just a battle of squares. Who gets what squares for their pieces? And obviously, this is a fantastic bishop. So I think when Capablanca played knight d4, he was interested in bishop f3 and getting rid of that nice bishop. Rook c8, played b4, kicking the knight, making it really symmetrical, this pawn structure. And bishop to g3. Now in this position, there's 4 squares we can fight for. These 4. And what I mean is, can somebody put a piece here or put a piece here? In this position, black can try to put a knight on c4, and white can try to put a knight on c5. Unfortunately, c5 is defended 3 times, and c4 is defended once. So advantage Alekhine. So he plays knight b6, he's going to play knight c4, which is annoying. That's getting a knight in your opponent's territory. Even though the pawn structure is symmetrical, black has a slight advantage because black is doing some active operation and white is just very passive. Queen b3, knight to d5, and he plays rook c4. So he's totally dominated the c4 square because the bishop left his post on e2. Just an advantage for black. I control c4, you don't control c5. Controlling squares in your opponent's territory is always a nice thing to do, but usually super grandmasters don't let you do that. Knight e4, again, it seems like Capablanca always wants to trade everything off to make the game equal when he's slightly worse. Queen c8, defending his rook again, and they trade. Rook c1, pinning the knight. Queen a8, ready style. lining up the queen and bishop, making a battery, and unpinning his knight here. This is a very nice battery, putting pressure on that diagonal. Knight c3. I mean, already if it's black's move, this knight could probably just take on e3 and unleash on e4. The bishop and the queen make a great battery. So Capablanca says, let's trade everything and draw the game. It's pretty boring. Rook c8, and Capablanca starts his trading. Obviously, black is better. My knight on c4 can't be dislodged. There's no way white's going to put a knight on c5 or anywhere active. The nice knight on d4 can easily be kicked by e5. The knight on c4 can never be kicked. So this bishop and this knight are harassing these pawns. This bishop is harassing an empty diagonal. So again, the third game in a row where the players seem to have switched places. Alekhine outplaying Capablanca strategically, Capablanca playing too passively. a4, trying to trade some more. Knight goes to f3, bishop to b2, attacking the rook. And in this position, we can't play rook to c2 because the back rank is weak. So the rook has to move vertically somehow. He played rook to e1, where his rook is perfectly safe. And maybe he'll play e4 later and kick the queen. Rook d8, taking the file. They trade. And now it's blunder time. h3 is a good move. e5 is an excellent move, stopping the knight from going to d4. He wants to play e4, getting more space. And he does. And in this position, Capablanca makes a tactical blunder, but that's a very common thing to do when you're getting outplayed strategically. Black is totally dominating the whole board, basically. White's pieces have nothing active to do. The knight on c4 is there forever. White's minor pieces are terrible. So Capablanca makes a tactical mistake, which loses the game immediately. And a lot of people complain when I espouse the greatness of Morphy. They tell me Morphy's opponents were terrible. Morphy's opponents blundering every move. You can't compare Morphy to the players of today. The players today, their opponents play like geniuses. So it's very hard to win. There's a lot of draws now. And people would give those kind of monikers to these players, that these players play really well. Capablanca and Alekhine, most people put them in the top 10 of all time. And they wouldn't say anything like, oh, these guys defend worse than Morphy's opponents. They would never say anything like that. However, here's an example of white making, I think by today's standards, an elementary blunder. I think if this was in a match with Carlsen, Anand, Karyakin, people would be like, wow, what a terrible blunder. And when you're getting outplayed and your position's getting worse and worse, and there's very few good moves, it's easy to blunder. And he played knight to d4, and his reasoning was, if you take the knight, I won't just take back and be a pawn down for nothing. I'll pin the bishop. And then I'll trade some more pieces off, which makes the game closer to a draw. The game ended in one move. That's not the kind of blunder you just see in a world championship where one player just misses a move and has to resign. And that's what happened here. It's not an easy move to find. It's a lot easier when I tell you about it. If I give you a big build-up and tell you black has a winning move, that's easier than if you're playing for the world championship and nobody tells you. It's still not easy. So what's the winning move that Alekhine played? Winning the game, and again, winning with the black pieces, which we don't see a lot of in world championship matches today. Anyone? What should black play? People on YouTube are yelling out the answer. Turn your engine off, you YouTube people. It's too exciting. See, now Capablanca doesn't feel so bad because you guys don't see it either. So that's good.
What about knight takes the pawn on D, whatever that is, 3.
E3? That is correct.
Yeah.
Knight takes E3, resigns. The game ended.
Sorry, I'm crappy with the square names.
No, you did well. You got the right answer. Now, there's very few variations to analyze because black's threatening queen takes queen and knight takes rook. So there's only one move for white. Any other move makes no sense. You have to play queen takes queen. There is no other move. You can't lose all your pieces. Okay, so he resigned. After queen takes queen, we take with the rook. Now we're threatening knight takes rook, and we're up a piece. That's a good double whammy. If you take the knight, I take with check, and I win your rook on d1. So after knight takes e3, it's over. The game's over. So Capablanca resigned. Obviously, Capablanca didn't see knight takes e3, or he wouldn't have played knight d4 and rook d1. So a terrible blunder where the game ends immediately. Now, when I say something is a terrible blunder, a lot of the people in the audience are like, I never would have seen knight takes e3. That's not a terrible blunder. That's really hard to find knight takes e3. Why are you dissing the guy like that? When I say terrible blunder, I don't mean that everybody in the war would see the refutation. What I mean is, if your opponent does see the refutation, you have to resign. That's a terrible blunder. A terrible blunder just means if your opponent plays correctly, the game's over immediately. And a lot of times in chess, you make a mistake, the engine says you're worse or lost, and you play 30 or 40 more moves, and maybe you win. Maybe other things happen. But after knight takes e3, that's it. So in the World Championship match, it's rare that one of the two players makes a move, their player goes, oh, I resign. Usually they don't miss moves like that. Knight takes e3 is a tactic. It's a discovered attack. It attacks all of white's pieces. That's the kind of move these players see. So if a player today in a World Championship match played knight d4, rook d1, and black played that, the commentators on the internet would be brutal. Man, would they, boy. Like back then, nobody knew. But nowadays, if you make a blunder, the whole world knows the second you do it. Unbelievable. So people have to blunder less now because it's embarrassing. Knight takes e3. Good job, Karen. Okay, that wasn't set up or nothing. Yeah. Yay, go Karen. So the match ended 6 wins for Alekhine, 3 wins for Capablanca. Alekhine was the world champion. Capablanca never got a rematch. You could argue Alekhine was ducking him. You could argue Capablanca couldn't raise the money. You could argue a lot of stuff. One of the things that, in my opinion, again, I was brought up in the household, where Alekhine isn't so highly thought of. One of the negatives for Alekhine is some of his opponents were suspicious after Capablanca. Bogolyubov and Erva. And Erva beat him because occasionally Alekhine maybe drank too much. And probably Alekhine had the same problem as Capablanca. He thought, oh boy, some easy world championship matches. And you can't underestimate your opponent, even if you're much better than them. Anybody can beat you. And Erva did win the first match. And then, unlike his predecessors, he blundered. He gave Alekhine a rematch. Terrible. Okay? And nobody's going to beat you if you don't play them. So at some point, when FIDE took over, they said this system has to change. We can't have the world champion picking his opponents and having the opponents raise the money. We got to have the best players in the world play with some system so that the matches are, the best matches we can find. And certain players over the last, 100 years didn't necessarily get a chance at their peak to play a world championship match when they deserved it for one reason or another. But obviously, in 1927, these were the 2 best players in the world. And a lot of the super grandmasters at the time thought Alekhine had no chance. And one of them, I don't know if it was, I think it might have been Spielman, he said, I don't think Alekhine's going to win a game. So, they picked the right opponent, and it looks like everybody underestimated him. Not a good idea in chess. Don't underestimate anybody, as I've learned many times on my stream. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you like and subscribe. and follow the streams on Twitch for me and Karen. And this is Grandmaster Ben Finegold, once again thanking our sponsor, Charles Marshall, for this lecture on the Capablanca Alekhine match of 1927. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.